Let me tell you something strange about growing up. We live in a world where maturity is treated like a finish line. A point you're supposed to cross quietly, somewhere between your 20s and your responsibilities. Yet some people reach adulthood and still feel unfinished inside. Not reckless, not childish in obvious ways, just paused. And here's the question that always lingers beneath the surface. How can someone look grown, function well, and still feel like they never really arrived? It's easy to assume immaturity means laziness, avoidance, a refusal to take life seriously. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play. One that has less to do with irresponsibility and more to do with protection. Because for some people, growing up didn't feel like expansion. It felt like loss. See, for some people, immaturity isn't rebellion. It's preservation. It's the quiet decision to hold on to something that once made life feel bearable, something light, something unclaimed by expectation. And from the outside, that can look confusing, even frustrating, but inside, it often feels necessary. You see it in small ways. You avoid commitments that feel permanent. You joke when conversations turn serious. You delay decisions that would lock you into one version of yourself. Not because you don't care, but because choosing feels dangerous. Like once you choose, something else will disappear. Others notice it too. They might say you're charming but unreliable, insightful but inconsistent, emotionally aware, yet strangely distant from adulthood's rituals. And maybe you've heard it before that you need to grow up, as if maturity were a switch you forgot to flip. But psychologists have noticed something fascinating. What we call immaturity often isn't a lack of development. It's a different kind of development. One shaped by early experiences where being too visible, too dependent, or too spontaneous came at a cost. When growing up meant tightening, not unfolding. In those environments, play becomes risky, expression becomes monitored, and adulthood stops feeling like freedom. It starts to feel like repetition. So some people resist it, quietly, internally. They stay in a psychological middle ground where possibility still exists. It's not about avoiding responsibility. It's about avoiding finality. Because adulthood, as we frame it culturally, often demands a narrowing. One career, one role, one stable version of yourself. And if your early life taught you that roles can become cages, of course you hesitate. Of course you delay. Of course you keep one foot out the door. Maybe that's not immaturity. Maybe it's memory. For many, this pattern begins after a kind of emotional burnout. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow realization. You did what was expected. You were capable, adaptable, responsible early on. And yet, something essential was never addressed. The part of you that wanted to explore without consequence, to fail without punishment, to exist without being evaluated. So adulthood doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like more of the same. Here's what's often misunderstood. People assume immature adults lack self-awareness, but often, they're hyper-aware. They see the systems clearly, the compromises, the way people trade curiosity for security, presence for performance, and something in them resists that exchange. They don't want to become efficient versions of themselves at the cost of aliveness. There's a psychological concept beneath this, identity foreclosure. When a person is pushed internally or externally into adopting adult roles before their inner identity has had room to form, they may comply outwardly while remaining unresolved inwardly. The self never fully lands, it stays fluid, searching, so they experiment longer. They delay labels. They live in possibilities rather than conclusions. And to a world that values certainty, that looks like immaturity. But internally, it's an attempt to stay honest. Culture complicates this, because let's be honest, our version of adulthood isn't neutral. It rewards productivity over presence, stability over meaning, It praises people who have it together, even if that togetherness came from suppression rather than integration. So if you hesitate to join that structure, something must be wrong with you. Also, the story goes, but maybe the discomfort isn't personal. Maybe it's contextual, because think about it, when was the last time you felt excited by the idea of settling? Not relieved, not safe, but genuinely alive. And if that question feels hard to answer, what does that tell you? This is where the paradox emerges. Not everyone who appears immature is avoiding growth. Some are avoiding repetition. They've seen what happens when people grow older without growing deeper, when responsibility replaces reflection, when adulthood becomes a performance of seriousness rather than an expansion of self. But this pattern has a shadow, because not all resistance comes from clarity. Some comes from fear. Fear of commitment, fear of being seen. Fear that once you choose, you'll be exposed as unprepared. That the child inside you, still unsure, still sensitive, will be revealed. So you stay light, non-committal, you keep things flexible. And over time, that flexibility becomes its own trap. Because while you're avoiding loss, you're also avoiding depth. There's an existential layer here that's easy to miss. To grow up isn't just to age, it's to accept limitation, to accept that you can't be everything. That time will ask you to choose. And for someone whose sense of self was never fully protected early on, that acceptance feels like surrender. In a world that constantly says be more, choosing to be specific feels terrifying. Here's the paradox. Immature adults often crave depth, but resist structure. They want meaning but fear the containers that might hold it. They long for intimacy, but hesitate at permanence. So life stays provisional, always about to begin. And the longer this continues, the more the world starts to feel heavy. Others move forward, build lives, make choices. And you're still circling the question of who you're allowed to become. Studies suggest that people who delay adult commitments often experience heightened anxiety, not because they're failing, but because uncertainty keeps the nervous system alert. Possibility is exciting at first, but without grounding, it becomes exhausting. The mind stays open, the body never rests. This isn't about forcing maturity, it's about understanding what maturity actually is. Because maturity isn't rigidity. It isn't seriousness. It isn't the abandonment of play. Real maturity is integration. The ability to carry your inner child forward without letting it run the whole system. The capacity to choose not because you're pressured, but because you're ready to inhabit the consequences. But that readiness can't be rushed. And this depth is often misunderstood. People may see your hesitation as irresponsibility, your humor as avoidance, your flexibility as flakiness, but what they don't see is the care underneath it, the desire not to lose yourself again, the fear of becoming someone efficient but empty. Maybe that's what immature adults are protecting, not youth but wholeness. Maybe some parts of growing up require mourning first, mourning the childhood that felt unsafe, mourning the adulthood that was presented as the only option, mourning the selves you were never allowed to try on without consequence. And maybe healing doesn't mean finally becoming grown. Maybe it means redefining what growth looks like. So the next time you notice someone who seems stuck between worlds, don't assume they're refusing to grow. Maybe they're waiting to grow honestly, waiting for a version of adulthood that feels like an expansion, not an erasure. And maybe, just maybe, immaturity isn't the absence of growth. It's the insistence that growth should feel like becoming more yourself, not less. In the end, growing up isn't about abandoning the child within you. It's about finally giving that child a place to stand inside a life that can hold them. And perhaps that's the quiet wisdom here. Maturity isn't about arriving somewhere final. It's about choosing to stay once you finally feel safe enough to land.